Is what happens if, despite all these weapons that are being sent over to Ukraine, what happens if Ukraine does not get the outcome it is hoping for in the Donbass region? You've got Biden promising Zelensky $1 billion in military assistance that includes howitzers, ammunition, coastal defense systems. We'll see whether it's deployed and how it's used effectively to turn the tide of this war. Salma, thank you so much. And thank you for watching One World. I'm Zain Asher. Amanpour is up next. You're watching CNN.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Amanpour. Here's what's coming up.
We are extremely focused on stepping up, providing more support, more advanced weapons.
But Ukraine fears the supplies won't come fast enough as Russian forces gain ground in the east. Unpacking the challenges and potential consequences with retired U.S. Army General Ben Hodges. Then,
I've seen the river high a lot of times, but this is the highest I've ever seen it, though.
From record rains and flooding to dangerous heat, extreme weather grips countries around the world. But is the urgency to address climate change fading amid the world's other crises? NASA climatologist Gavin Schmidt joins me. And
if this framework becomes the actual piece of legislation, it's a step forward.
Will Congress finally pass meaningful gun reforms? Former Senator Russ Feingold on the chances for a deal and the explosive January 6th hearings. Plus,
anyone who succeeds after prison is succeeding in spite of prison, not because of it.
She went from ice skater to inmate. Now Corrections in Ink author Carrie Blakinger tells Hari Srinivasan how she's fighting to fix the broken prison system she endured.
Okay, we interrupt Amanpour to take you to Brussels, where U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin and Joint Chiefs Chairman Mark Milley are holding a press conference right now. Let's listen in.
Defense, Lloyd Austin. Yeah, glad to be joined by General Mark Milley, Chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff here this evening. Good evening, everyone. We've had a very productive afternoon at the third meeting of the Ukraine Defense Contact Group. And it's great to be back together in person after our initial meeting at Ramstein in April. And once again, we met with Ukraine's Minister of Defense, my good friend, Oleksiy Reznikov. Everyone here is acutely aware of the dangers that Ukraine faces as Russia renews its reckless assault on the Donbass. And Minister Reznikov and his team gave us important insights into the changing battle space and a clearer understanding of Ukraine's priority requirements as the war shifts. We also had some important discussions about how to fortify our midterm and long-term support for Ukraine through training and sustainment. I'm especially pleased that defense leaders from some 50 countries came together here today. It's a testament to the on-the-ground impact of this contact group that it continues to grow. And I'm glad that we were joined today at today's meeting by several new countries, including Ecuador and Georgia and Moldova. And that's a reminder of how Russia's unprovoked and indefensible invasion of Ukraine has horrified and galvanized the world. But it's also a sign of the global admiration for the heroism and resilience of the Ukrainian people. You can see that in the progress that we've made since this contact group's previous virtual meeting a few weeks ago. In May, the U.S. Congress approved $40 billion to provide additional security assistance, economic and humanitarian support for Ukraine. And on June 1st, President Biden authorized an additional $700 million to meet Ukraine's critical needs for today's fight. And that included HIMARS rocket systems with guided MLRS munitions. This package also included javelins, helicopters, counter-battery radars, and ammunition. And I'm especially pleased to be able to announce today that the United States will provide an additional $1 billion security assistance package for Ukraine. And that includes our 12th drawdown from DoD inventory since August of 2021. And it includes guided MLRS munitions, 18 more M777 howitzers, and the tactical vehicles to tow them, and 36,000 rounds of 155 millimeter ammunition. This package also includes $650 million in Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative funds, and that will help Ukraine defend itself with 2 additional Harpoon coastal defense systems and thousands of secure radios, and night vision devices, and thermal sights, and other optics. Now, our allies and partners have also risen to the moment. We heard some significant announcements this afternoon about new security assistance packages for Ukraine. And many countries are providing Ukraine with urgently needed systems and ammunition. Other friends have made new commitments to train Ukraine's forces and sustain its military systems. But there are too many countries to properly thank here. I'll just take a moment to highlight a few. I want to thank Germany, which announced today it will provide 3 multiple launch rocket systems and guided MLRS munitions to Ukraine. We're working shoulder to shoulder with both the UK and now Germany as we develop Ukraine's long-range fires capabilities. This effort also builds upon our transfer of HIMARS. Let me also thank Slovakia, which announced a significant donation of MI series helicopters and of urgently needed rocket ammunition. And we also discussed important new artillery donations from many countries, including Canada and Poland and the Netherlands. These are key investments in Ukraine's long-range fires capabilities, and they'll be crucial to Ukraine's efforts to repel Russia's assault in the Donbass. I'm very thankful to these countries and to all of the countries that are helping Ukraine to defend itself, even as the war shifts and Ukraine's most urgent needs continue to evolve. Since the contact group first came together nearly 3 months ago, we've built tremendous momentum for donations and delivery of military assistance. And after this afternoon's discussions, we're not just going to maintain that momentum, we're going to move even faster and push even harder. We'll deepen our coordination and cooperation, and we'll bolster Ukraine's armed forces to help them repel Russian aggression now and in the future. So we'll continue working closely and intensively together with this contact group, and we'll keep on strengthening our support for Ukraine's self-defense, and we'll continue to stand up for the rules-based international order that protects us all. Thank you, and I'll turn it over to General Milley.
Thanks, Secretary Austin, for your words and for your leadership in putting together this contact group. It is indeed making a significant difference, and it frankly wouldn't be happening without Secretary Austin. And I want to thank also, as Secretary Austin said, the around 50 countries who participated in this 3rd iteration of the Ukraine Defense Contact Group. And I also want to thank Ukrainian's Deputy Chad, who attended Lieutenant General Moisuk to today's meeting. The collective efforts of this group have helped achieve undeniable effects on the battlefield against the Russians. And we collectively will continue to support Ukraine as they defend against the unprovoked war, the illegal war being waged by Russia on Ukrainian sovereign national territory. In the current phase of this conflict, the Ukrainians are fighting hard, tooth and nail, every day, inch by inch, yard by yard, kilometer by kilometer, against the Russian advance in the Donbass. The Ministers of Defense and the Chiefs of Defense who met today are committed to providing Ukrainians the means to halt Russian aggression and defend their sovereign territory. The world has a significant stake in the outcome of what happens in Ukraine. The so-called rules-based international order is at stake that has been in place since the end of World War II to prevent great power war and to prevent large powers from conquering smaller countries with military force. Ukraine is under threat. They are at war, and we will continue to support them. But the rules-based international order is also under threat due to the actions of Russia in the Ukraine. The international community is not allowing this unambiguous act of aggression by Russia to go unanswered. To do so, the risks to the world returning to an era when large, powerful countries can invade smaller countries at will. That is what the international community is up against. Since the initiation of hostilities in late February, the global community has responded in an unprecedented manner. The Ukrainian Security Assistance Program has been calculated, responsive, and relevant to Ukrainian defense requirements. Our close and ongoing relationship with Ukraine's military leaders has informed our process to provide a tailored, timely assistance based on Ukrainian needs. Leaders at multiple levels, including the U.S.-European Command, led by General Walters, have maintained consistent contact with Ukrainian counterparts. Additionally, I have remained in active communication with the Ukrainian Chief of Staff, General Zaluzny, each week, several times a week, sometimes several times a day. At the onset of the Russian invasion, the global community took action in the form of security assistance to help Ukraine defend itself. This immediate assistance had exceptional impact on the battlefield. Russia halted and turned back their initial advances in the face of fierce Ukrainian resistance. As Russia now invades the Donbas region, which began this offensive on 16 April, some 60 days ago, we, along with our allies and partners, have provided dozens of 155mm howitzers and almost 500,000 rounds. By the end of this month, we will transfer HIMARS systems, ammunition, trained crews for operational use in the defense of Ukraine. We and other countries are building a platoon at a time in order to certify the Ukrainians to make sure that they can properly employ and maintain the system. And in a few weeks, the Ukrainians will have trained long-range rocket artillery in the fight. To date, we have trained 420 Ukrainians on the M777 howitzer, 300 Ukrainians on the self-propelled M109, 129 on the 113 armored personnel carrier, 100 on unmanned aerial systems, and 60, most recently graduating today, on the HIMARS. Additionally, we have provided, the United States has provided, 6,500 javelins and 20,000 other anti-armor systems. Collectively, the international community has provided almost 97,000 anti-tank systems, more anti-tank systems than there are tanks in the world. We have also provided over 1,500 Stingers, more than 700 Switchblade tactical unmanned aerial systems, 20 Mi-17s, and thousands of small arms, and thousands, hundreds of thousands of small arms ammunition. The speed that we have delivered security assistance is without comparison. From the time the requests are validated and authorized, it is only a matter of days until the requirement is sourced, shipped, and in the hands of Ukrainians. In some cases, it may take a week, but most of the time, it's measured in days. While more work is required, we could not have achieved this progress without the active assistance from the countries who are present today. We gathered today both in the defense of Ukraine and really in the defense of the world. It is only through the preservation of the rules-based international order that we are going to continue to have a peaceful international system that everyone benefits from. As we move together, we will continue to coordinate with our allies and partners around the globe to help support the Ukrainians with the training and the tools they need to fight and maintain their country's defense. I look forward to your questions.
Peter Martin, Bloomberg.
Yeah, thank you very much. Secretary Austin, Ukraine has publicly asked for a long list of weapons, including 1,000 howitzers, 500 tanks, and 300 multiple launch rocket systems. You've repeatedly stressed that US assistance needs to be driven by Ukraine's needs. And with that in mind, do you think that this latest package risks providing Ukraine with too little too late? And then for Chairman Milley, at this point, do you see the consolidation of Russian control in eastern Ukraine as inevitable? Thank you.
Well, thanks for the question. You're right. We remain focused on Ukraine's needs, and we understand what those needs are because, as you heard the chairman say, he's in contact with his counterpart sometimes a couple of times a week. I talk to the Minister of Defense, Reznikov, routinely. And one of the key benefits of having this contact group is that we have the ability of bringing the Ukrainian leadership in. The Minister of Defense, the Vice Chief of Defense, and have them give us a laydown of the battlefield dynamics, and then talk again about what their current requirements are. And as you know, the battlefield is dynamic, needs will evolve over time, and they've identified those needs currently to be long-range fires capability, armor, and some mid-range anti-aircraft capability, and also howitzers, which is different from the HIMARS. And so we remain focused on what their needs are currently, and also in the near term, looking out several weeks and months. Eventually, we'll want to work with our allies and partners to build a capability that to sustain themselves over time. But we really are focused on what the leadership believes that its current needs are in this fight. And I think we've done the international community has done a pretty good job of providing that capability, but it's never enough. And so we're going to continue to work hard to move things, as much capability as we can, as fast as we can, and to ensure that Ukraine can be successful on the battlefield.
So on your question of the Donbass, but on the numbers, just real quick, I'm not sure what you're referring to, but I talked to General Zaluzny. We get lists. These are official requests from their Department of Defense. They asked for 10 battalions of artillery, 12 battalions of artillery were delivered. Again, I say 97,000 anti-tank systems. That's more anti-tank systems than tanks in the world. They asked for 200 tanks. They got 237 tanks. They asked for 100 infantry fighting vehicles. They got over 300. We've delivered, roughly speaking, 1,600 or so air defense systems and about 60,000 air defense rounds. This is, when I say us, I mean the international community. You're looking at 260 artillery tube systems, either rocket or tube. Artillery have been already delivered. There's 383 committed, and like I said, almost 500,000 rounds of artillery. The bottom line, and I can go down the whole list of everything. Bottom line is everything General Zaluzny asked for, as rapidly as possible. We get it sourced through the international community, through the United States and allies and partners, and we get it done as rapidly as we can. So I don't know where those numbers are that you're coming from, but we are supporting, we the international community are taking it very seriously, and we are supporting the Ukrainian military as rapidly as humanly possible. With respect to is it inevitable that the Russians will consolidate power in the Donbass? As I said, that the war started on 24 February. They were defeated in and around Kyiv. They took their forces, they marshaled them and massed them in and around the Donbass. And so right now, that's where the battle's taking place. Two oblasts are in the Donbass. One is Luhansk. The other is Donetsk. It's really the Luhansk oblast where most of the significant fighting is happening in and around Severodonetsk. Right now, the Severodonetsk, the city, is probably 3/4 taken or so by Russian forces, but the Ukrainians are fighting them street by street, house by house. And it's not a done deal. There are no inevitabilities in war. War takes many turns. So I wouldn't say it's a inevitability, but I would say that the numbers clearly favor the Russians. In terms of artillery, they do outnumber, they outgun and outrange. You've heard that many times. And they do have enough forces. But the Russians have run into a lot of problems. They've got command and control issues, logistics issues, they've got morale issues, leadership issues, and a wide variety of other issues. So the Ukrainians are fighting a heroic fight. This fight down in the Donbass has been going on since 16 April. And the advances that the Russians have made have been very slow, a very tough slog, very severe battle of attrition, almost World War I-like. And the Russians have suffered tremendous amounts of casualties.
Jonathan Beale from the BBC.
Thank you very much. If I can ask Secretary Austin, I think the Deputy Defence Minister of Ukraine has said that the West has given Ukraine 10% of what it's asked for. Do you recognise that figure? And if I can ask General Milley, do you really think that US sending 4 HIMARS systems, the UK sending 3 MLRS rocket launchers, and Germany sending 3, is really going to tip the balance in the Donbass in Ukraine's favour? It doesn't seem that much when you look at the numbers. I know you've given me lots of other numbers, but do you think it's really going to tip the balance? Thank you.
On the second part of that question, I think you have to be careful about equating a HIMARS capability or an M270 capability to other MLRS systems. These are precision munitions. And with a properly trained crew, they will hit what they're aiming at, and it provides some pretty good capability in terms of distance. But a capability is a weapon, a trained crew, and munitions. And so as we train those crews up, we're able to provide them with systems and munitions, and then you have an initial capability, and then you build on it. So over time, yeah, we think the combination of what the allies and partners can bring to the table, it will make a difference. But again, this is a different kind of capability than what you've seen from other multiple launch rocket systems. On the 10% issue, I don't know if you're quoting the Minister of Foreign Affairs or if you're quoting the Deputy Defense Minister. Well, we just spent time with his boss in the room next door, and as we have on a number of occasions and gone down line by line of what they need and is relevant in this fight. So we feel pretty confident that we're working hard to give them what they think is relevant. In terms of, where the big number came from, I can't speak to that. You'll have to let that gentleman explain his numbers. But I would only say this. General Milley and I have been in a number of fights. And when you're in a fight, you can never get enough. You always want more. You always believe that you need more, and I have been there. And so I, certainly understand where the Ukrainians are coming from, and we're going to fight hard to get them everything they need. But again, we want to make sure that we're focused on what they think they need for this current fight and beyond. And I think this contact group brings together the right elements to be able to sort through that. And again, this is a constant effort. We don't believe that we're going to meet every need by tomorrow. And in 2 weeks from now, requirements will probably have evolved a bit. So I think we have to put things in perspective. You can never, when you're in the fight, you can never get enough, and you can never get it quick enough. So, but having said all that, we're going to work hard to make sure we're doing everything humanly possible. We're going to continue to move heaven and earth to get them the capability that they need. So let me, first of all, in warfare, no weapon system is a silver bullet ever. So no weapon system, singular weapon system ever, quote unquote, turns the balance. It's the combination it's a combined arms fight. It's a combination of ground maneuver with air and artillery and so on and so forth. And that's where the HIMARS comes in. In this case, in terms of fires, this is a battle of fires. So the Ukrainians have mortars. They're going to go out to 5, 7, 8 kilometers. Then they've got the tube artillery. That's going to take you out to 25 kilometers with precision fire or accurate fire with the 777s. Then they've also got rocket-assisted projectiles, which will go out to 40 kilometers. And now the HIMARS will go out to 85 kilometers. So we're providing them, as you said, with the Brits and others, about 10 systems. They're going to have well over 100 rounds of ammunition. That's initial package. We're training a platoon at a time in Germany. The Secretary has directed the next platoon to be trained and so on. So this capability will build. But because it's a precision weapon, the amount of ammunition that we're given, if they use it properly, and we just ran the certification exercise in the last 48 hours for these guys, if they use the weapon properly and it's employed properly,
they ought to be able to take out a significant amount of targets, and that will make a difference in combination with the 777s hitting at 40 and 25 kilometers in the mortars. So you want to echelon these fires. I will say this, the Ukrainians' artillery, their skills, the artillery skills of the Ukrainians are very, very good. They're top-notch gunners, and the effect that they're achieving on the battlefield right now with the 777s has been very, very good, very effective, and we expect the same out of the HIMARS.
Idris Ali from Reuters.
Mr. Secretary, in the past you've talked about the United States' aim in Ukraine being to help the Ukrainians win the war and weaken Russia. Is that still the United States' goal, or is that out of reach now that Russia seems to be making incremental gains in the East? And for the chairman, Ukrainians have talked about losing between 100 and 200 soldiers a day. Is that your assessment, and is this level of attrition sustainable for a military the size of Ukraine's?
Thanks for the question, Idris. I think you recall the op-ed that the President Biden published here just recently. And in that op-ed, I think he laid it out in straightforward terms in terms of what our goals are, and that is that we want to see a democratic, independent, sovereign, and prosperous Ukraine with the means to deter and to defend its sovereign territory. So I think that that addresses the question in terms of what our goals and objectives are. But again, we have said all along that we want to help Ukraine by providing it the security assistance, the means that it needs to do what I just said. What's been impressive about the Ukrainian people, and especially their soldiers, they're willing to fight to protect their sovereign territory. And so if we get them the means, the materials, the weapons, they've demonstrated that they can put them to good use. So we're going to continue to support them with as much as we can and get it to them as fast as we can. And we're going to remain in contact with them to make sure that we understand their needs as this battlefield evolves. And so again, I point back to the benefit of bringing ministers from around the globe together. Again, 30 members of NATO, around 50 or so ministers of defense in this meeting today. And I think that sends a powerful message about how much people around the world care about making sure that we have, that countries have the ability to protect their sovereign spaces, and that we respect the rules of the international rules of law. So, Chairman.
On the assessment, let me caveat by saying casualties estimates in war are always extraordinarily difficult, and most of the time the initial casualty estimates are inaccurate. And it may take months or even years sometimes to get accurate casualty estimates. But having said that, in the media you see reported that Ukraine is taking 100 killed and 100 or 200 or 300 wounded per day. I would say those are in the ballpark of our assessments. I don't want to give you the actual assessments. And can they sustain that? For Ukraine, this is an existential threat. They're fighting for the very life of their country. So your ability to endure suffering, your ability to endure casualties is directly proportional to the object to be attained. And if the object to be attained is survival of your country, then you're going to sustain it. And as long as they have leadership and they have the means by which to fight, ammunition, artillery tubes, etc., then I think Ukraine will continue to fight.
All right, one last question will be from Yuri Shako from Deutsche Welle.
Thank you very much. I have two questions also about numbers and artillery. So, Secretary, you said that there were some other countries that also announced some additional artillery. Can you say us a little bit more what you can, of course? And another question, you said a lot about the advantages of HIMARS and also of advantages of 737s. Of course, they are very precise, it's clear, but if we look really at the numbers of what Ukrainians got, and we compare it with many, many hundreds of artillery systems that Russians had, and also hundreds of MLRS systems that Russians have, and even if we look at what Ukraine had, it had also many hundreds of artillery pieces and also a lot of MLRS, but Ukraine is running out of ammunition for these older systems. And if we look at this gap that Ukraine has now, as it's running out of ammunition, what Ukraine received from the West is not really close to close this gap. So why now we hear only about like 18 additional howitzers, which is not really that much to close that huge gap? Thank you very much.
Yeah, so I think you made the point in the first part of your question there that other countries are providing artillery systems and munitions as well. Now, I'll let the chairman speak to the inventory, but I can assure you that the Ukrainians have a lot of 155 munitions or ammunition at this point. The United States has, we've pushed on our own 108 155 systems into country, and this next package includes another 18. But there are systems coming from a number of other countries around the globe. Some are self-propelled systems, some are towed systems, and they're also providing ammunition. Now, again, it's a combination of the howitzers, the cannon artillery, and the long-range rockets that will create a pretty good capability. And again, as you target things with that long-range capability, you're going after things like command and control nodes and logistical nodes and those kinds of things, which will begin to attrit the adversary's ability to sustain itself and command and control itself. But yeah, I mean, with the systems that we've provided them to date, I mean, the M777s have been absolutely lethal. The problem with the 152 howitzer is that you're no longer making munitions for those howitzers, and so we're going to very quickly have to transition completely to 155s. But other countries are providing capability in addition to what we're providing, and even today, other countries stepped up to the plate and volunteered to provide more. Chairman.
So, first of all, the Russians do outnumber, in terms of artillery, they outnumber the Ukrainians. The estimates vary. Some say 4, 5, 6 to 1, others say 10, 15 to 1, others say 20 to 1. What the true accurate number is, I'll keep our assessments in the classified realm. But they outnumber them, and that's important. But war is not just a game of numbers, it's how you use them. The Russians are using artillery to just do massed fire on Ukrainian positions, but also civilian populations in urban areas. There's about, according to public estimates, some 20,000 Ukrainian civilians have been killed. There's 7 million internally displaced Ukrainians. There's 6 million refugees. So the Russians are just doing massed fires without necessarily achieving military effect, shall we say. The Ukrainians, on the other hand, are using much better artillery techniques, and they're having pretty good effect on the Russians. The Russians have lost probably somewhere in the tune of 20 to 30% of their armored force. That's significant. That's huge. So the Ukrainians are fighting a very effective fight tactically with both fires and maneuver, and that's significant. In terms of the numbers, just from today's conference, pledges of almost 100 additional tubes were being made. So you're looking at probably 300 or 400 artillery tubes, not rocket artillery, but tubes, that'll be provided in total to the Ukrainians. And then on top of that will be the long-range rocket artillery that what you're seeing with the HIMARS is just the beginning.
Thank you, everyone.
All right. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin and U.S. Joint Chief of Staff General Mark Milley speaking there in Brussels at NATO headquarters, really outlining in detail, I would say, the sort of security, military assistance that the U.S. is going to be providing Ukraine. Secretary Austin detailed, saying that it's no secret the sort of dangers that Ukraine is facing right now, particularly in the Donbass region. He talked about the productive meeting that he had with 50 or so of his counterparts there. And he also said that this is why, given the dangers that Ukrainians are facing in the Donbass region, given the threat from Russia, this is why the U.S. stands at the ready to provide the training and the weaponry that is necessary to turn the tide in this war. He outlined the $1 billion security assistance package, the military package that President Biden spoke to President Zelensky about, including MLRS munitions, howitzers, and various ammunitions or so he talked about, and he thanked the various other countries, not just the US, that is assisting Ukraine in this fight, which is crucial for Ukraine to defend itself. I want to bring in Selma Abdelaziz, who's joining us from Kyiv. So Selma, given what's at stake, though, given the sorts of losses that Ukrainian fighters have experienced in recent days, and given the fact that, you know, even General Milley sort of talked about the fact that Russia does have the upper hand right now, are the Ukrainians really going to be satisfied at this point with what the U.S. is providing here?
I think what stood out to me is when he said we've sat down with our Ukrainian counterparts and we went line by line with what they need, what they want at this time. And this is an ever-evolving battlefield, and it could change again in a few days. It could change again in a couple of weeks. But we're listening to what they need, and we are doing our best to provide it to them. So I think for the part of the United States and, of course, the rest of the allies of Ukraine in this meeting, they feel that they are listening and responding to the needs of the battlefield right now at this moment. And, of course, the key battlefield right now is in the Donbass and Severodonetsk. They were even asked this question, do you think the fall of Severodonetsk, a city that's right now up to 80% under Russian control, where Ukrainian forces are absolutely on the back foot, where they seem to be catastrophically low on artillery? That was from a Ukrainian official. When asked by a journalist, is it inevitable that Severodonetsk will fall? Can you help in the Donbass? They said nothing is inevitable. It is not a foregone conclusion. We believe we can help. They said the speed with which these weapons that are promised arrive is unmatched in modern times. I'm paraphrasing here, but that was the statement, that essentially these weapons are promised and within a matter of days they are on their way. They did acknowledge, of course, the training, but they said hundreds of Ukrainian soldiers are already being trained on these weapons. And when you do look at the needs on the battlefield, it does appear that these weapons are addressing them. The first one, of course, running out of artillery. They said they're providing artillery. The need for long-range weapon systems to try to target Russian positions up to 80 kilometers away. That's being provided with these HIMARS and other long-range systems. The coastal defense systems as well, which will be used, of course. Russia has been using warships in the Black Sea to fire upon Ukrainian territory. So the hope that that could ease that pressure a bit. The multiple launch rocket systems, that's something that President Zelensky has repeatedly called for and something that Russian troops do have. And the other point they kept making, Zain, is it's not just about firepower. It's not just about the sheer amount, numbers of stuff you have. It's about how you use it. And they had high praise, saying that the Ukrainian forces are tactical in their use, whereas Russian forces sort of carpet bomb, if you will, using these World War I style tactics, just laying everything out. So there's a sense that with agility, with speed, with staying in touch with Ukrainian forces, they can continue to move and provide weapons as they need them, when they need them on the battlefield.
Yeah, he pointed out that, you know, the Russians have command and control issues, logistic issues, morale issues as well. So in that sense, maybe the Ukrainians do have the upper hand in a certain way, but that General Milley pointed out that nothing is inevitable. The situation on the ground there is constantly evolving on the battlefield. Selma Abdelaziz live for us there. Thank you so much. We return now to Amanpur, which is already in progress.
I guess things looked okay on paper.
Yeah.
But then by the time I got to Cornell, I was already pretty heavily into drugs and continued to use drugs while I was there.
When you were writing the book, was there a moment that you figured out why drugs entered your life?
I think that during the years that I was skating, people that knew me probably would have been pretty aware that I was intense and obsessive and depressed. I was struggling with eating disorders. And when my skating career fell apart, that seemed like I was losing my whole social circle, my whole present, you know, my future. Like, that was the future I envisioned for myself. And I kind of liken it to getting divorced and fired from your job and also every job forever. And at 17, I was not particularly stable and not well equipped to handle that. And I was already on a self-destructive path. So I don't think, looking back, that it was particularly shocking that I took it to that sort of a dark place.
There's a line that says, on the one hand, I was staying sober and had even started working a summer job at a genetics lab. On the other, I was working in a toxic world of shady New Jersey strip clubs and selling 8 balls of coke into the wee hours of the morning. How did you just physically balance this, much less kind of create the separation in your brain where, well, you thought this was still possible?
I mean, 37-year-old me looks back and has some of those same questions in terms of how I managed all that. But, I mean, I think, like I said, I think that part of it for me was, on the one hand, I was really depressed and, self-destructive. And, I let drugs fill the hole in my life where skating had been. And so on the one hand, I was working towards self-destruction, but on the other hand, I was trying to, do well enough in school that I could tell myself that I wasn't completely a lost cause. I think I'd also been brought up to value academics so much that they seem tantamount to like moral good. And I think this was also part of why I was so interested in making sure that I could maintain this, dual life that seems so wild in retrospect, but, I took almost for granted as my normal at the time.
It's clear in the book that you're smart in the sense that, schoolwork was pretty relatively easy for you. You don't write about anything being a structural stumbling block. And even when I read the parts about you dealing drugs, I mean, there's a level of entrepreneurism, there's some calculation, there's risk assessment, critical thinking, not in the way that we think about it, but a lot of things required by a smart person not to, get caught. And yet when you do get caught, it's, incredibly just a tragic sort of scene. You have a Tupperware full of heroin that you're caught with.
Yeah, although I have to say, in terms of why I didn't get caught sooner, it's not just about being, smart or savvy about your drug use. I mean, race has a lot to do with this. I can think of a lot of interactions that I had with police over the years that I think would have gone differently if I were Black or brown. And, I think that has a lot to do with it. There's no amount of being smart that will really prevent you from getting caught forever. Drug use is, it's legally risky. And eventually your luck runs out.
What were the charges, I guess, and how much time did you serve?
I was charged with drug possession, and I ended up serving 21 months on a 2.5-year sentence. And, there's a few factors that went into that sentence, but one of the things that I think about a lot, aside from, the racial privilege that I mentioned before, which I think sort of always has a role in criminal justice outcomes, but another thing that had a big role was the dumb luck of timing, because I was arrested in 2010, and that was right after the Rockefeller laws had been progressively repealed over a number of years. Some of the big parts of them were repealed in 2004 and 2009, and those laws had been some of the most draconian 3 strikes type laws in the country at the point at which they were enacted. And had I been sentenced under those laws, I would have gotten 15 to life, and I would still be in prison and not even eligible for parole yet. But by the time I got sentenced, those laws had been repealed, and I was able to get a 2.5-year sentence.
When you get into prison, what was the thing that kind of shocked you?
Oh, wow. Jail and prison is just such a different world. It's sort of its own kingdom in a lot of ways, to an extent that I think a lot of people don't understand. And I think one of the things that really illustrates this was actually not from my first days in jail, but months later when I got sentenced and I went to prison. And my first morning in prison, we were a bunch of us newbies were waiting to be transferred to another facility. And as we were waiting for the draft bus that would, the bus that would take us to the other facility, I remember overhearing two guards talking about this woman who was in solitary, and she had, she'd taken a dump on a tray and pushed it back out the slot at the guards. I don't know why. I don't know if she was being vindictive, if she was mentally ill, if she had just been in there long enough that she was breaking. Like, I have no idea what prompted it. But I was listening to the guards talk about it, and one of them was wondering, they had decided to turn off the water in her cell in response to that act. And one of them was wondering what she was going to drink. And the other one said, well, she can just drink out of the toilet. If it's good enough for my dog, it's good enough for her. And that was a moment at which it really drove home the idea that prison is really its own kingdom. There are effectively no rules. Like, sure, there are rules, but in the moment, if the staff want to do something, there's no oversight in that moment to prevent that from occurring. And that's one of the things that really stuck with me.
You had a sentence in there that struck me, and it said, solitary is not so much being alone as it is being buried alive. Explain that.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, when they hear solitary confinement, they think that solitary is just like spending time alone. And they'll say, oh, I like spending time alone. It would be like a break from all the stress of jail and prison. It wouldn't be that bad. And I might have thought that before I actually went in, but as soon as I first walked in that cell and they slammed the door behind me, I realized how incredibly wrong I was about that. It's, a room the size of your bathroom or maybe a large elevator, and it was sort of neon white, and there's no clock and nothing to do and no one to talk to. And there was like a little window slit over the bunk, but you'd get yelled at if you stood on it to talk to anyone. And, that's bad enough. But then when you add to it that this isn't voluntary, I think that people might think, oh, I can hang out in my bathroom for a while or whatever, and it's not great, but I'll survive. But the fact that you have no control over it, I think definitely adds another dimension. And in the end, I think solitary takes away sort of two of the core things about being human and how we define ourselves. One of the ways we define ourselves as people is in relation to others, in our ability to interact with them, self versus other. Like, this is part of how we define us. And then part of it is also just the ability to have agency, to make decisions, to take the steps and actions that define us. And solitary really takes away both of those.
It struck me how easily accessible drugs were through so many different facilities that you were incarcerated in. And I think most people would have a tough time understanding, wait a minute, she's describing this as commonplace. How is it so accessible?
Yeah, I think a lot of people assume that if you put someone in jail or prison, at the very least, they will be forced to dry out. They'll be forced to stay sober for a little bit. They won't have access to drugs, but that is typically not true. When I was in prison, I could get heroin delivered to my bedside if I wanted. And frankly, the places where I was incarcerated are not as drug-soaked as some of the prisons I write about now as a reporter.
And do you think that is there an incentive for the jail, the prison to let that continue?
Well, I think it's difficult to stop because some of the sources are the staff. I mean, that's in a lot of systems, that's one of the big sources of how all kinds of contraband gets in. And, if your staff are going to participate in that, that's really hard to route out.
In your work now as an investigative reporter at the Marshall Project, you've been focusing a lot on stories out of Texas. You wrote recently about the death of 2 prisoners from a fire, and we just don't think that that's possible inside a prison. This is an area where people are watched. We have safeguards for this. What went wrong?
Well, for one, many Texas prisons do not have working fire alarms in the housing areas, and the state fire marshal has flagged them on this for more than a decade, and they are several million short of what they would need to be able to make functional fire alarms. I think it was 55 million is what they said they expected it would take to put functional fire alarms in every facility. But, you know, this is also about sort of broader problems in terms of staffing and the way that prisoners are treated. In this instance, one of those fires, one at the Gibb Lewis unit, was started by a man who was trying to get higher ups to respond to an issue. And this is a thing that happens sometimes in Texas prisons, where people will start a fire if the officer on their unit is not responding to their needs. And the idea is that the fire will force someone from higher up to come respond to them. You know, maybe it's because they're not getting showers for days, or they're not getting fed, or, you know, sometimes it's other very basic needs. And the idea is that in starting a fire, they hope that a major or somebody will come down and ask what the problem is. But in this case, you know, nobody pulled the guy out of a cell. And he ended up being left in there while it was burning for, by several accounts, roughly half an hour. And he ended up dying of smoke inhalation. And, you know, as someone who's been covering Texas prisons, I wasn't particularly surprised by this outcome, because I'd written about this problem before, about the lack of fire alarms, about, you know, understaffing, about the fact that prisoners were starting fires in their cells to protest conditions, or, you know, because they were acting out on mental health issues. So yeah, that's a situation that I think would be shocking to the average person who doesn't know what really goes on in prisons. But as someone who's been covering it for some time, it seemed foreseeable.
What has the pandemic done to how we think of the incarcerated? What kinds of things changed for people behind bars?
I mean, I think predictably the pandemic was stark. It was bad in prisons. Prisons are essentially a petri dish for disease, because they are communal living environments. And the best, you know, the best thing that a lot of prisons could think of was to lock everybody down, confine them to bunks, or, you know, keep them in solitary, which is not a great solution. So, I mean, in that sense, it was dark, but it also was one of the first times that I can remember seeing so many people care about the deteriorating conditions behind bars. Because for once, people realized that this could affect them. Like, if these prisons just became sort of petri dishes for disease that would then come back out into the surrounding communities, it would affect everyone. And I saw there was a time period at the beginning of the pandemic where prisons and prison conditions actually got more coverage than I'd seen for quite a while. I'm not sure it made any difference. There were still, conditions were still bad. There were still a lot of lawsuits. Food got pretty inedible looking in some prisons. There was a lot of fires and, just really appalling conditions. Although one of the other interesting side effects was that it became easier to document some of that, because in some facilities, prisoners were more able to hang on to contraband phones when there were fewer cell searches. So as bad as conditions got, it was not only a time where, for some point, people seemed to care a little more, but also it was easier to document.
So look, you're a fantastic journalist today and covering things that you feel are important to you. And I wonder if it's because of the experiences that you've had in your life and in the prison system, or in spite of it.
Well, I think that anyone who succeeds after prison is succeeding in spite of prison, not because of it. But I think that in terms of my ability to cover prisons, that inside knowledge has given me a different starting place than a lot of reporters. So I approach some of these stories in a different way. And I think that some of the people that I cover see that.
The book is called Corrections in Ink, investigative reporter for the Marshall Project, Carrie Blakinger. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Really important journalism, and what an incredible story. And finally tonight, sky watchers were treated to a strawberry supermoon that sweetened the sky last night. Supermoons are the brightest and biggest full moons of the year. Now, this happens when the moon reaches its closest approach to the Earth. Here you can see the moon rising behind an ancient temple on the coast of Greece. But you may be wondering why it's named after a pink berry when it doesn't have a strawberry hue. Well, the celestial body is in fact named after the beginning of the strawberry picking season in the Northern Hemisphere. See, we learn something new every day. Well, that is it for now. You can always catch us online, on our podcast, and across social media. Thank you so much for watching, and goodbye from New York.
Egypt is developing a sustainable,